Good day, good day, good day, and welcome to another Tuesday with Tom. I just love that music, man. It makes me feel so good. We're brought to you by the Best Girl Consulting Firm. Best Girl consults with utilities, higher ed associations, large nonprofits to customize solutions that will support your bottom line. It is Tuesday, November 3rd, E Day, Election Day, or V Day, Voting Day. Of course, many of us have already voted. I think we're about 500,000 votes short of 100 million people having already voted, which says there's a lot of excitement about the presidential race I'm talking about. Of course, there are a lot of Senate races and local races going on. This Tuesday, our format's going to be just a little different. It's something we do on special days and dates throughout the year. You'll see it again at Christmas. Wallace Edwards and Mychal Walker are going to be here, and our special guest today on what we call Audience Participation Day is you. That's right. You're going to be our G-list guest. We encourage you to join in on the dialogue as we explore voting today. Tell our own stories of voting, not just today, but we'll look back and we'll look ahead. So we're not necessarily interested in who you voted for. If you want to tell us, you're welcome. But in my mind, that's always been private for me. If you want to share who you voted for or plan to vote for, that's your business, but by no name, but just no name calling. You know what we say, empty barrels make the most noise, because we're all adults here. So let's behave. Now, no, we don't want to share your ideas, tell stories, and enjoy each other. We do want to do that. This is something we'll do on special days. We do it again during the Christmas season. So let me introduce my two roundtable guests, Barbara Wallace Edwards. Barbara is from Birmingham, Alabama. She retired from Blue Cross Blue Shield. She is a big-time traveler. And Barbara, what's happening with you? How was your Halloween?
Good morning, Tom. Halloween was kind of quiet. I didn't have that the first trick-or-treater. I had all these decorations out and candy sitting there waiting back for the kids to come by, and not one child stopped by. So it's
You
kind of
should have made a
sad.
candy shoot. You should have made a candy shoot so the candy could just come out and land in their bags.
And I would have just been shooting it out on the street. No kids even walked by. There's not many children in my neighborhood. I lived in kind of a small neighborhood and a lot of retirees here. So there's not a lot of children in our neighborhood. So we
Well,
didn't have that the first trick-or-treater.
we normally have hundreds. I mean, just people. They, like I said, they block the streets off, and they're all up and down the street. But I only saw a few
Mhm.
this time, and we didn't do it for some personal reasons. But yeah, like this, like the rest of this year. It was very
Right.
different
Very
Halloween.
different.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to my sorority sister, Gwendolyn Richardson, for sending me, if I can find my necklace here, this beautiful necklace. I don't know if you guys can see it. It says vote. I
Oh,
admired her
good.
necklace and she sent this to me. So Gwen, thank you so very much for sending this gift.
And her name is Gwendolyn Richardson, you
Richard,
said?
yes, my sorority sister, my line sister actually, from
Okay,
Monroeville,
Gwen,
Alabama.
Barbara's line sister. You didn't send me
Yeah.
one. What's up with that? Huh? Okay, I hope you're watching. Next time you
I
give
hope she
Barbara
is.
something, you got to send me something. Okay, let's see. Mychal Walker. Mychal is from Atlanta, Georgia. He's president of the Walker Agency, a full service insurance brokerage. Mychal, how are you this morning?
I am doing well, Tom. I hope you are too, and the same to you, Barbara, and happy voting day.
Happy voting
Thank
day.
you.
How was your Halloween, Mychal?
Well, my Halloween was kind of interesting. I spent it on a cul-de-sac with a group of people where they had like trick-or-treaters from everybody in the neighborhood coming through on the cul-de-sac. It was quite interesting. All the adults were dressed up. I think the adults enjoyed it more so than the kids. But also, it was interesting. One group came up on a golf cart with all their kids, and they were dressed like little Martians. And people would get out, and they had the little ones in front of them carrying around. It was hilarious. And then they got back on the golf cart and sped away. It was really pretty funny.
So what were you dressed as?
As a black man.
Well, that can be scary sometimes for some people.
Yeah.
I've
That
seen
was
it
my
scare
thought.
people before, believe me. Especially if you're a big black man. It can be awfully scary.
Yes, you're right.
Okay,
Um,
okay. So let's talk a little bit of this is a different format today. We got the whole show. And so let's talk a little bit about voting. And why don't we start out with maybe some voting stories, the first time we voted. And I'll start off here. I think the first time, well, I know the first time I voted in a presidential election was 1972. George McGovern and Richard Nixon. And believe it or not, George McGovern only got 17 electoral votes for the whole election. He was wiped out. Nixon won 49 of 50 states, which says something because later on we know Nixon had to resign from the presidency. So obviously he was a good salesperson in the beginning. McGovern was a little bit of a hippie, and that attracted me. And for some reason, I didn't like Nixon, so I voted for McGovern. I was one of those people that helped him get that 17 electoral votes. But McGovern was very much, and probably one of the reasons I was eligible for the draft at that age. And of course, we had the draft then, where when you turned 18, you had to go and to the Selective Service office and register, which I did. And then you had to see if, in fact, you were going to be drafted. There were people in my neighborhood. Let's see, Daryl has checked in with us. Good morning, Daryl. How are you, brother? Stay with us. We like. Good morning, Barbara. Barbara Miller's here. We look forward to hearing from you guys throughout the show. Anyway, I registered and I signed up to go to college, so I got a deferment, and I didn't have to go to the military. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. The lottery came up, and I think my number was like 219, which they never got over 130 something in terms of the order. And so I did not have to go, but I was basically against the war, which was pretty much my reason for voting for George McGovern. That was my first presidential vote. Barbara, do you remember yours?
I do. My first presidential election I voted in was back in 1976 when our beloved president from Georgia won, Jimmy Carter. So that was monumental for me. It was really exciting time. I actually skipped class at Auburn to be back in Mobile so that I could vote. So it was great.
You know, when you say you skipped class, I remember that there was an effort back then to try and get it so that college students could vote in the town where they went to college. And the big politicians were all against that because more than likely people weren't going to skip class like you did,
right,
and drive back to Mobile to vote. So they just didn't get to vote. But they basically would not go for that.
I know. Yeah, I remember that vividly. So I drove down to Mobile, made it there in time to vote, and got back in the car immediately after going to my parents' house to eat dinner, and got back on the road and drove back to Auburn so I could be in class the next day. So I'll probably never forget that.
It's interesting. For 20 years, at least 20 years, I've been voting absentee because I was always in California when the vote came up, and they would send me an absentee ballot, and have just continued to do so because a lot of times I'm not at home. Let's see, Emily's first time she voted, her first vote was in 2012. Let's see. Emily voted. She voted absentee because she's registered to vote in Maryland. Okay, Mychal, what about you?
Well, I voted with barber the first time that I voted. So I was in that same group in '76 when President Jimmy Carter was running and he won. You know, to me, at that particular time, voting, I felt such a sense of civic responsibility. I
Yes.
felt like it was a chance for, if you will, a new breath of fresh air, you know, and I was participating in it. I felt like it was a time for hope in the future, and I had an opportunity to express my position. Of course, being at such a young age, I had to listen to my grandparents and their reasoning for why they voted. My grandparents were Democrats, but they were what they call the blue dog Democrats, the very conservative Democrats, and what have you. But I listened a lot as to why they voted the way they voted and what have you. And I just felt a sense of pride to say that I'm now old enough to participate in this process, to cast a vote, to help make a decision in the way that the country is going. And I cannot say that right now. I think instead of a sense of pride, some people may be feeling some apprehension. I know there's a lot of uncertainty in where we're going to go. And it just seems like right now, America, we have a tendency for the pendulum to be either all the way to the left or all the way to the right. And I think a lot of America is kind of middle of the road, you know. Tom, you mentioned earlier about compromise. I don't see a lot of compromise anymore. Um, you know, there's legendary stories about Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, how they would go at each other. And then later that night, they'd meet and have a drink and work out the issues for the best interests of America. I just don't see that happening anymore.
And go ahead, Barb.
I was just going to add, Mychal mentioned there's a lot of apprehension today in, when people voting. I think there's also a lot of fear. Tom, you mentioned earlier that we're just 500,000 of 100 million people voting early. And I think there was just a lot of fear in people going to the polls today. They weren't sure what was going to happen. And, there may be some violence there. So people are voting today. They're fearful of actually going to the polls. But I was very comforted. It was comforting in knowing I saw a couple of posts on Facebook earlier this morning where people were posting photos of long lines at the polls today. So there's still tons of people that are out there trying to vote this morning. And that's really good to see.
Okay, Joyce has posted something. She says she wanted to vote in 1975 after the voting age was changed from 21 to 18 in 1971, but her birthday was too late in April for the mayoral election. So the first time she was able to vote was in 1976 for the presidential election. That election was Jimmy Carter, right?
Yes.
What I remember about that election, well, I want to go back just for a second. I think one of the issues is, to me, we need to get rid of all this left and right and red and blue and all that crap. Nobody's one thing. Nobody is all the way conservative on everything. Nobody's all the way liberal on everything. I think if we do away with the titles, I don't know. One of my friends down the street, we were talking and we were on the opposite sides of this issue. And we just sat there and talked about it. Nobody got angry. Nobody cursed. Nobody called names or whatever. I think most people, and one of the things I want to talk about later, and we should remind me, because is how much of this does the media stoke? And we can get into labeling the media, whether they're conservative media or whether they're for whatever. But to me, that's sort of a lazy way of doing it when you label people, because then you don't have to, first of all, get to know them. You don't have to go into depth over the issue. You just label them and go from there. And I think that's one of the things that needs to be corrected. 1976, Jimmy Carter. What I remember about that election was I was working for Channel 42 in Birmingham, and I was shooting the news, and I got to go cover Jimmy Carter's announcement in Birmingham, and walked in there with my little camera, my case, and the Secret Service guys were there, and they made me open everything up and look at it. And I said something kiddingly that I probably shouldn't have said, and they didn't laugh. They were very serious about it. But it was just interesting to I'd never been in the audience for somebody who was running for president of the United States. And that was very, very interesting. Anything else on first time voting? No?
I can tell you, I can remember
Go ahead.
the first time I wanted to vote, Tom, was back in 1972. Of course, I wasn't old enough, but that was the year that A.J. Cooper down in Mobile was the first Black mayor in the state of Alabama to win the election over a white incumbent. And so that was a huge deal. And I remember, my parents and all the adults in the community talking about that election, how important it was. And so that was the first time I really was interested in wanted to vote myself personally. It just wasn't old enough. So just want to share that story.
Good deal. I think in Birmingham, that was 1979 when Mayor Harrington won the election over his friend, David Vann. Art Jenkins, good morning, Art. Art says, good morning. We voted early, so put your mask on and go vote. I got you. I think everybody here has already voted. Is that right? Barbara, you voted already?
Yes, correct. I did.
Okay.
I voted about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I did as well. So, Emily, you voted already? Okay. Not yet, she says. She's going soon as she gets off this. Okay. So let's do a little commercial for Best Girl, and then we'll come back and talk some more about voting. You got it. Today's show is sponsored by Best Girl Inc. What is Best Girl? Best Girl is a consulting firm that provides customized leadership, access and inclusion, public relations, communications, and organizational consulting services. Our clients include Fortune 500 companies, utilities, higher education institutions, small businesses, and associations. We have a team of consultants led by Joyce Gossom and Miss Emily Hedrick, and they partner with business and education business clients to promote organizational effectiveness and education, motivation, and leadership. Our customized consulting services include strategic planning, corporate communications, executive coaching, fundraising, and some economic development. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Okay. Daryl says his first presidential election was when he voted for President Obama because I was always either in college or overseas. I never got to vote. I graduated from high school in '74 and registered to vote. Well, we're glad you're voting now, and obviously you picked the winner when you voted for Obama. So unlike my first time, I voted for a guy who only took one state. So good deal. So let's talk a little bit about, and we don't have to just talk about the presidential race. I'm sure there are some local races. We got some local races here where we are. Some of them are races to raise taxes for schools, money for schools, which is probably a good thing. So one of the things that's been said, though, about the presidential race is this race in particular is about the soul of the country. Now, do you agree with that? And what does that mean to you, Barbara?
Well, I'm not so sure I agree with that, Tom. I think it's more about the soul of a party. People are really attached. Some people are really attached to a particular party. That's how they're voting, not their soul, not their conscience, not even some of the things that they say they truly believe in. It's really, they're just following a party. It's more about the money, economics, than the soul of the country itself, in my opinion.
Okay, Mychal.
Well, I have a tendency to agree with Barbara. I don't know if it's for the soul of the country. Um, it's
But
certainly a
go ahead. What do it mean when they say the soul of the country? What does that even mean?
well, I think for different people it means different things. For the soul of the country, I think well, I really don't know, but I think they're trying to say getting to the heart of the country. I would probably say the conscience of America is what this election is about. If I were going to tagline it, I'd say this election is about the conscience of America. And if you look back at 2020 and everything, people are wondering, does America have a conscience? And one of the things that, and I like to interject this in here,
Sure.
we're talking about the president election. How do you feel about all of these rappers all of a sudden going to meet with President Trump and then coming out saying they endorse the president? Over the weekend, it was Lil Wayne that met with him privately and comes out and saying he's wearing a MAGA hat and takes a picture with him. Before it was 50 Cent saying that he was supporting the president, and Ice Cube went in and made a special agreement. And most recently, somebody named Little Pump. I never heard of. And why does everybody have to be little? When are they going to grow up and be big? But anyway, Little Pump came
There's
out
a
and
lot
said
about
that.
them, Mychal. I think.
What are you saying? Pump, P-U-M-P? What are you?
Yes,
Okay.
somebody named Lil Pump. He came out and said that if Joe Biden wins, he's leaving the country. Does anybody really care?
Good. Good.
Considering the fact that I never heard of him, so I probably don't care.
Yeah, right.
That's my point.
We
Who's
don't
Lil
care.
Pump? And if you're so little, we don't care. We need somebody that's big in these days and time. So, it drives me nuts and especially.
But I think that goes. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, especially if you, and I'm not going to criticize or look down on anyone for their way of making a living, but if you look at their method of making a living, their lyrics and what have you, usually it's at the exploitation of their own people, their own women, and what have you. But then they're going to turn around and align themselves with a president that certainly has been exploitative against women, the Hollywood Access tapes and what have you. And all of a sudden they are a scholar on the electoral process and picking a president. I just don't get it. But what I will say is interesting is that people in the Republican Party, they are embracing Lil Pump, Lil Wayne, and all of these people. But someone like LeBron comes out, they tell him to shut up and dribble. But LeBron has never been in any trouble with the law. He's been a model citizen. And so you get this hate at LeBron because he's on the other side and he's talking about making things equal for everybody. And he's campaigning for Black Lives Matter. Not that no other lives matter. We just want unilateral treatment. But these other people, the Republican Party, they're embracing them. I just don't get it.
I think.
Go ahead, Bob.
I think, Mychal, it goes back to something I said before. This election is more about economics from a personal standpoint. People are voting for their pocketbooks. They think that the people that they're supporting is somehow is going to make their financial situation better or secure, make sure that their money is secure and they're not going to lose money and have to pay more taxes. And so they're not looking out for the country as a whole. I think they're looking at their individual pocketbooks and their individual finances and making decisions based on that. And that's how they're deciding which candidate to support. In some cases, that's the case. I've heard several of those individuals say if the current president or the administration should change, then they're concerned about the amount of taxes they'll have to pay. Again, you're looking at one thing, but the people who are supporting you and helping you raise that, get that to that financial status, or the people are going to be hurt if someone else wins the election. So, it's all about economics, in my opinion.
Well, and I don't think that we totally understand that when they talk about the economy. I'm not sure that people totally understand. I think they look at it from what you just said, from their personal perspective. But Mychal and I, both being in small business, will testify that a lot of the jobs that have been created in large organizations are jobs that don't require a whole lot of thought and don't pay a lot of money, but we consider that full employment. And you try and get one of these companies on the telephone to talk to them about an issue and see how long you're on hold. See the inefficiencies that are built into that company because of this, quote, full employment, when you have people who couldn't answer any question beyond what their name is and what the name of the company, they can't answer it for you. So I don't know. I saw where Bed Bath & Beyond is closing all these stores, but their online business is going great. That's where it's headed. When it comes out of this pandemic, a lot of those brick and mortar retail locations are going to be gone, and it'll be online, and it'll be a totally different thing. Now, will that be full employment? I guess so, if you're employed. But it's full employment used to be about my dad having a job in the pipe shop, people having jobs in the steel plants, the type jobs that you could buy a house, you could send your children to college, you could participate in the American dream. And I think that has slipped away. And I agree with you. I'll say this, Mychal, about LeBron. I've never been a LeBron James basketball fan. I've never really cared who was the greatest of all time and all that. I just, why argue about that? Who knows? Who cares? But I admire LeBron James as a man, as what he has contributed to society, what he continues to contribute when he chooses to speak out. He started that school for those kids up in Ohio. LeBron James, to me, has made very significant contributions to our society. And I go back to what you said at the beginning, Mychal. You dressed as the big black man for Halloween. LeBron's problem is he's a big black man, and he's a big black man with an opinion. And sometimes that doesn't go over well in America.
Well, that's true. That reminds me, I used to wear a T-shirt that says "Danger, educated black man here." And I used to wear that T-shirt around, and that's very interesting, the looks you get from that, because knowledge is power, and that's what we need to learn more as people. And I guess that's why LeBron, even though he did not go to college, he has educated himself on political or current affairs and what have you. And you're right, he does make some very good decisions off the court.
I mean, he's done. I mean, for a guy that, what was he, 18 when he went to the NBA?
Yes.
I mean, and he's been playing now, 16 years, something like that, some incredible number. Most of the guys who start at that age, and Big D can probably testify to this, and who play for that long, generally bump their heads somewhere along the way. And the only thing that this guy has done that he was criticized for was deciding to leave Cleveland and go play in Miami. And
after his contract expired. Exactly.
Which was his legal right to do. Not only his legal right, it was probably the best thing for his family. You know?
And one other caveat, Tom, I'd like to add to that. LeBron grew up without a father in the household, so a lot of that has to be given to him and his mother as far as how he turned out. A lot of praise from there.
And his current family, because you don't ever hear any quote mess about them. Let me change the subject just for a minute. It's still about voting and voting today. I think it's very interesting. All of us are either from Alabama, lived in Alabama, or consider ourselves Alabamians. What do you think about the Senate race? Doug Jones and Coach Tommy Tuberville. I saw where last week, which I think was a little late, that Doug Jones's camp, excuse me, ran an ad where several black football players who played for Coach Tuberville basically questioned or disagreed or wondered who this guy was, because this wasn't a guy they were familiar with as their football coach.
Right.
Any comments?
Yeah, I did see an article, Tom, where several of the former players that Coach Tuberville coached spoke out and said that they were surprised that he was running for political office. They felt like he should have stayed in coaching, that he's out of his element right now. But another one said that they were not surprised because he's no longer in the limelight as a coach. He moved back to Alabama, where, again, when you're not a coach, you're not in politics, you're not doing anything major. He wasn't getting a lot of attention, and I guess as a coach, he sort of missed that limelight. So he didn't want to get back in coaching. So I guess he thought, well, politics is the way to go. But when you don't really know anything about politics, you don't know your civic history. That's pretty evident on some questions, how he answered certain questions that the news media presented to him. He's really out of his element right now, and I don't think he's the right candidate for the job.
I agree with you. M has posted that Charles Barkley put out a message to vote for Doug Jones that was running yesterday. I agree. I don't think he's qualified. But I hate to say it this way, but it's Alabama, and I think let me put it this way. I think there's a lot of straight party voting in Alabama. You either go in and you hit the Democrat thing and that you vote for all the Democrats, or you hit the Republican and one vote and you vote for all the Republicans. Alabama is pretty much a straight ticket voting area. So I think that probably will be Coach Tuberville's strength, as opposed to people individually seeking him out to vote for.
Right.
Well, if I could chime in
and
here.
I think that's such a shame that people. Yeah. Go ahead, Mychal.
One other thing, Tom, that you mentioned as Tuberville's strength, and this is what some of the players talked about, is how he's aligned himself with the current president and saying that he's going to be right there in lockstep with the president and voting to support him. And if I were a former player that played under Tuberville, I'd feel the same way. It's like, is this who he really is? Or was he just faking to get me to come play for him? Was there any genuineness to him being a coach? And supposedly, when the coach comes into your home and sit down with you, he's telling your parents that he's going to take care of you. He's going to be that father figure and look out for you and help mold you. And a lot of people, especially people that played athletics, will say that the coach was the next person outside the family that was a role model to them and taught them discipline and what have you. So I understand how a lot of the players feel, who's the real Tuberville here? And I wonder if it were anybody else, would they get a vote? And I'm going to insert the word privilege here.
Yeah.
He's privileged, okay? Because if you're going to tell me that somebody is going to run for public office, and I'm going to say it again, run for Senate or run for the House of Representatives, and they don't know what the Voting Rights Act is, that's very basic. That's your pathway to getting there, is being elected. You get elected based on votes, and you don't know what the Voting Rights Act is. But yet and still,
Right.
you're going to get elected to Senate.
Well, what does that say about the electorate?
Not a whole lot.
Right.
That's probably the best way to sum it up.
Not much at all.
It says something about being number 49, and I'm not talking about my old
Right,
football
exactly.
number. I'm talking about
Right.
ranking of states.
Absolutely. And that's where they're going to keep us voting like
Let me run this by you. So COVID affects everything, and I heard this morning that if you had tested positive, you could still go vote. You had to let the people know at the polling place that you had tested positive when you get there, and then they would make some special arrangement so that you could continue. You could still vote.
But
As
Tom, isn't it a little too late at that point once you made it inside the polling place? Yet you stood it probably in a long line with people to get inside and let them know that you tested positive. You know, it's a little backwards to me.
I agree with you. You've been standing in line for
many
6
lives
hours, and you get up to the front and say, "Oh,
Right.
I need to tell you something."
Yeah,
Yeah.
Let me admit something now. I may have infected 500 people back there in line, but let me tell you now that I have tested positive.
Do you
Wow.
over a 7-day period in the last week, 536,000 Americans tested positive. Is COVID the main issue of this election, this presidential election?
It should be, but I'm not so sure that people are looking at that and making a decision about who the candidate they're going to vote for. Again, there's a lot to be said about how the current administration has handled the COVID issue and hasn't supported the remedies that will probably lower those numbers a lot. And having rallies and not requiring people to wear masks and having indoor rallies, things of that nature have put people's lives in danger. So I don't understand how people can still support someone that seems not to care about the health and welfare of those that they're potential supporters.
It's Mychal, you got anything on that?
I would say, in my mind, COVID and healthcare are the two most important issues. And COVID is all in a category to its own, but you have to bring healthcare in there as a component of that because COVID affected everybody's health. And we already had an issue with healthcare. And I have to say, there are some people trying to make it about the economy, but I think COVID impacted the economy.
Very much
So
so.
if you want to try to compartmentalize and isolate the economy and say it's about the economy, you can't do one without the other. This is a unique situation, and I think
Right.
they all are interrelated. A quick example, as you know, I always talk about what's going on in the world of healthcare, and I've got a news brief this morning saying Medicaid's future hinges on who wins the White House.
Mm.
And basically, what they're talking about is that under a Biden administration, they would seek to expand Medicaid to help people that are uninsured get insurance. Under the current administration, we all know that the leader of the current administration has been trying to get rid of healthcare.gov, or what's affectionately known as Obamacare. And a lot of Republican governors have resisted expanding Medicaid, which would have helped the uninsured people in their state, because if you expand it under healthcare.gov, then the federal government gives you reimbursement of 50 to 75% of the cost of expansion. But if you don't do that, then you lose out on money. And Republican people in Missouri and Oklahoma have gone against Republican governors and legislators and say, we want it expanded. But there was an example of a guy here from Miami who was working, he's working in doing signage for airports. He had to make the decision as to whether to put food on the table or pay the monthly premium for his wife to be on his group health insurance plan, which was $700 a month, was what he had to pay. And he had to come to grips with, what do I do? Do I use the $700 to pay for food and take her off? Or do I keep paying for that and we starve? He made the decision to take her off. She got sick, as fate would have it. Came down with COVID and had to go to the hospital. And the article talks about he kept asking them about the bill because he was concerned about it. And they never really told him. Found out the bill for intensive care and everything was $92,000. And she's out of the hospital, but his concern now is paying for the medication. Okay. And then working something out on that bill. And he said, you know, his hours were being cut back because, you know, airline travel, it was hit hard. The airline industry was hit hard. So you had layoffs and all of that. So that impacted him. So I don't see how you can say this election is about one without the other. And I've said many times, being in the healthcare industry and knowing that you have so many people that are uninsured, and regardless of whether you agree with former President Barack Obama, you have to say that there were well intentions in creating healthcare.gov. And I myself, if I were the leader of the free world and I did not agree with that, I know something is better than nothing. I would fill up the gaps or fill up the holes in the plan and make it better and more robust, rather than trying to get rid of it in the middle of a pandemic when I just told you this story of this man. How can you do that and consider yourself the leader of the free world? And how can you say it's not about health care?
Right. And they're trying to get rid of it, Mychal, and don't have a replacement. That's the scary part. Again, like you said, something is better than nothing. And, you know, to try to repeal Obamacare and not have a suitable replacement, even on paper that anyone has seen, they keep talking about there's a plan, but no one has seen a plan. So, yeah, you know, and America's voting based on, yeah, right, no replacement plan.
If you have insurance tied to your work situation, like I do, there's still the fear that it's going to go away, or that it'll be diminished, so much that you'll end up paying more money just to have the basic health insurance coverage. That's where I feel, you know, to me, again, I'm the guy that doesn't want to have left, right, red and blue, so on and so forth. The other thing I do away with is, if you're in Congress, if everybody doesn't have the same insurance you have, then you shouldn't have it. Because in that case, you would vote differently than you would vote than currently the way they're voting to take away somebody's insurance. If the vote in Congress was to take away their insurance, be a piece of cake. Wouldn't have to worry about it. It wouldn't be about left, right, blue and whatever, red. You know, it'd be about I've got to take care of my family. London, our guest from last week, London came on. London, I'm sorry I didn't get your message there, but appreciate you being with us. And boy, we had such a great time with you last week. Mychal, I want to just say something here, and I know that who we vote for is private and so on and so forth. But we've talked about Republicans and Democrats and so on and so forth. And I think we've talked about that on this show. But if you don't mind, Michael's a Republican, Barbara's a Democrat, I'm a no party. So we're not favoring one party over another. We're not favoring one person over another. We're calling it the way we see it, which is the way I think it ought to be in the United States of America. I want a couple more things before we get off here. One, voter suppression. Any comments?
Mychal, I'm
Yes.
going to let you handle that one right now.
Voter suppression. Well, like Thom usually say, what does voter suppression mean? And who's doing the suppressing? Okay. And who is it impacting? Well, some of those questions we already know. And I find it interesting that a lot of the little tactics that are put into play, like for instance, you have to have, there was an issue about you have to have a government issued ID in order to vote. If you didn't have that, you couldn't vote. You know, in some places where they would close the voting time and people that are in line didn't get a chance to vote if they didn't get there by a certain period of time. Also, some of it on a different level, and we didn't talk about this yet, is the Electoral College.
Yeah, that's on my
the
list.
electors are supposed to really make the decision. I think that what we have to do, and when I say we, I'm including everybody, we have to make sure that we know what the rules of the game are and make sure that we are prepared for that. And what I mean by that is whenever I go to the poll to vote, before I go, I pull up my voter registration form online and I print that out so I'll know what address they have for me. Okay. Because if you go there and they always have you fill out the form, if you fill out the form and it's a different address than what they have, then even if you're wrong, even if you're right and they're wrong, you're still wrong, in other words. So if it doesn't match, they can stop you from voting then and say, well, did you move or whatever? So I always make sure that I have the information I fill out on the form is the exact thing that they have on their records. And I take my passport with me to say, I am a citizen, this is my passport, and it's legal. Are there some cases of voter suppression? I think so. I would say so. But I think it impacts people on the lower social economic side of the spectrum and on the lower educated side of the spectrum. And a lot of that has to do with environment. And you have a lot of people that in that area feel my vote doesn't count. It's not going to help me at all. And that furthers the suppression if you're caught up into that.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been said
Right.
a couple of things about election. If it's raining, that favors the Republican. And I know in a lot of campaigns that I've worked in, we would hope for rain on election day because that meant more Republicans would show up to vote if you're trying to get a candidate. That's just the strategy. Okay. Also, in a runoff, that tends to favor Republicans because the playbook says African American voters will not show up if it's raining, and they won't go back to the poll to vote again in a runoff election. So there are certain little things that can be implemented that will impact a certain segment of our voting population. But I think there are tactics to suppress the vote.
Well, and I think those tactics have matured, have become more, such as in Houston, where the guy was, there was only going to be one place in all of Houston where you could drop off your ballots.
Right.
in all of Houston, and that's ridiculous. And you can go back to the poll tax. There's always been a way to try and figure out how we can get less people to vote. I mean, my dad talked about having to take a test when he went to register to vote. I said, well, what did they ask you? He said, I don't remember, but I guess I didn't pass because I didn't get to vote, and he had to go back and do it again. So there's always been this suppression, and I'll just, and you mentioned the numbers of blacks, and I think that's one of the things that's blacks are really coming out strong in the in this election, in the early voting. But the last presidential election in Miami, in Florida, Trump won by 113,000 votes. In Miami alone, blacks did vote. You go to Philadelphia, Trump won by 44,000 votes, and 238,000 blacks didn't vote. And so sometimes you can suppress yourselves. And I think a lot of it goes back to what Mychal said about socioeconomic and education. Your vote does count. Barbara Miller says, my parents paid poll tax in Mobile in the 1950s. I have both of their original receipts today. So yeah, you had to pay. You had to pay to vote.
I found my mom's poll tax receipt where she paid in 1958 $3.50 poll taxes to vote. I mean, that was a lot of money. And so that's definitely a way that they try to suppress our votes.
I think, we're not talking that long ago. And I think if people, one of the things we've talked about when we talk about names on the buildings at the respective universities and so on and so forth is history. And I think if people really knew history, what has happened, and you're talking about in our lifetimes, I think they come to a different understanding, and then maybe start to look at things through the lens of somebody else's eyes. And if we're only looking at things through who has the most money and who can put the most money into this situation, most of the time that's not history isn't favorable. I'm so proud of having voted for George McGovern because I didn't vote for Richard Nixon. And, because I can look back and say, well, man, I was on the right side of that history. And I have tried to be on the right side of history most of my life. I want to ask one more thing while we got a few more minutes here. Is this election a referendum on race relations in America? And you're talking about, we watched on television where a police officer pressed his knee into George Floyd's neck for nearly 8 minutes. Just last week, a man was killed in Philadelphia because he had a knife, and he didn't rush the officers. He didn't move towards the officer. Of course, everybody's got video, so you can watch it on television now. And they shot this man 14 times. 7 times, 2 officers shot 7 times each. And his family was screaming to the officers that the man was mentally unstable. And so, of course, this set off more stuff in Philadelphia. Is this a referendum on race relations in the United States?
I definitely think you can say that, Tom. Again, we've seen where the current administration has not denounced a lot of the police killings of people who are not, they're not violent. They're not defensive. They're not threats to them, but they're killing them. Whereas in other instances, people that could be considered a threat are being safely detained or captured. And I think it definitely is a referendum on race relations. Mychal, what's your thoughts?
I'm I'm a little bit torn by that, and let me preface that by saying, from an obvious look at it, you absolutely would say that, and I understand why you say that, and I think to a certain extent it is. It shouldn't be, but also I think what goes into this is it needs to be a referendum on law and order. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the type of law and order the current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is talking about. I'm talking about law and order where it is implemented unilaterally across the board with everyone. And I think this election can do that. Given the situation that Thom was talking about in Pennsylvania, I later read that they talked about why not tase the man and
Right.
get him under control. And I heard that the police chief came out and said they did not have any tasers because of budget.
Hmm.
Their budget didn't allow them to have these tasers that could have rendered him harmless and they could have captured him. So that's all the police had. So if you put a police officer in a situation like that and they're already afraid and you don't have the right equipment, then they use what they've been trained to do. So it goes back to training, education, reform, and all of that. And I think we need to have complete law enforcement reform about how to deal with situations like that. But,
I'd, li-
you
I'd
know,
like to deal with that. Excuse you guys go ahead. I'll be right back.
okay. But, Barbara, from that standpoint, it seems like people on the darker skin hue are the ones that are impacted the most by this. And I agree with
Absolutely.
100%
Right.
that standpoint.
You know,
That
when they can actually capture and detain a young man with, I think, an AK-47 rifle, like some type of automatic
yeah,
rifle that shoots up a church, and detain him safely, and he not be shot and killed, but yet a young man who, we can go back and list several instances, young man in the backyard with a toy gun, this
right,
gentleman in Philadelphia with a gun, with a knife in his hand, Breonna Taylor, who again was defenseless, even though her boyfriend had a gun, was shooting to defend them, to make themselves safe. They thought someone's breaking into their home. Those situations, it just doesn't equate to there being uh, justifiable reasons for these individuals to be, I say, murdered. I'm going to use the term murdered because,
yeah.
again, where's the equality? Where's the justice there?
And that's what I'm talking about the law being implemented unilaterally. And you're
Right.
absolutely right. You get a person with an AK-47, and he just doesn't have as much melanin in his skin. He's taken
Mm-hmm.
alive without incident. But
Right.
somebody with a knife, they're shot
Yeah.
15 times.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
that's where there's an issue right there and stuff. But I think that
Right.
we have to look at law enforcement totally and reform.
Right.
And we're not
But
talking about
now,
defund, we're talking about reform because everybody wants
right.
law and order. We just
Exactly.
want it to be applied to us like it's applied to everyone else.
Unilaterally.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you guys. It's been great. I appreciate it very, very much. I appreciate the thoughtfulness. Hopefully, we will have a reasonable either re-election or transfer of power as we go forward as the United States of America. We can't just be united when some tragedy happens. Hopefully, we can live united and have tolerance um, for each other. So let's wrap it up. I thank you guys very much. I enjoyed it a lot, and Let me just close the commentary with a quote. I always leave you guys with a quote. And this is about worry. And if you can fix it, replace it, do it over, or do without, it's not worth worrying about. So have as much fun as you can conjure up. I want to thank the audience for being with us. Next week, our special guest will be Auburn basketball coach Bruce Pearl, who will give us a scoop on the Tigers' upcoming basketball season. We look forward to having Coach Pearl here. I know that we'll have a lot of fun. I want to thank Mychal, thank Barbara, thank the communicator, Emily Hedrick, and thank our sponsor, Best Girl. If you're interested in having your business be a sponsor of the show, get in touch with us at Tom@bestgirl with a U. Thank Emily Hedrick, our producer. That's a wrap. Enjoy yourself. Make every day count. And peace.